Hey everyone, Nigel here. If you're a regular viewer of the channel, you're probably aware that every once in a while we like to do update videos when there are developments in previous stories that we've covered. Since this month is a bit of a weird one for us upload-wise, we figured this would be a great opportunity to do another one of these videos because it still allows us to bring you something that you haven't seen before. Today, we're going to be covering updates to two past cases, both of which are ones that we first covered in the early days of this channel. If you haven't seen the original videos, don't worry, we're going to do a full summary before getting into the new information. In fact, we've also done a deeper dive now on both of these cases and have added a lot of information that wasn't in either of the previous videos. With that out of the way, let's get into it. This first story is one that we covered all the way back in 2020. Even if you haven't seen that video though, chances are you're familiar with this case, or more specifically, with the rather haunting image most commonly associated with it. I'm talking, of course, about the disappearance of Tara Calico. Back in 1988, Tara was a 19-year-old college student who, by all accounts, seemed to have a promising future ahead of her. She lived in the Rio Communities area of Valencia County, New Mexico, with her family, and was studying to become a psychiatrist. Though Tara was only in her sophomore year at the University of New Mexico, it seemed that she was on the right path to achieving her dreams. She maintained a 3.9 grade point average and was incredibly hardworking and organized. According to Tara's mother, Patty Dole, her daughter was particularly known for the detailed lists that she would keep. Each day, she'd lay out the tasks that she needed to accomplish, which she would then methodically tackle one by one. It helped her to make sure there was time for everything she wanted to do in her busy life, whether that was taking extra shifts at the local bank where she worked, or fitting in one of the many sports and activities she liked to do for exercise. Sadly, in the fall of that year, one of Tara's lists would remain forever uncompleted. At around 9:30 a.m. on September 20th, 1988, Tara left her family home on Brugg Drive and headed towards Highway 47. She was planning to do her normal bike route, a roughly 35-mile round trip which took her out into the nearby desert. The route was essentially a straight shot southeast down the roadway. Tara would usually stop near some train tracks close to the intersection with Highway 60 before turning around and taking the same way back home. On some days, Tara's mother Patty would accompany her on this ride. However, recently she had stopped going. Some sources state that this was because she felt like she was being followed, though we weren't able to verify this claim. In any case, Tara set out alone that morning. She was actually on her mother's neon pink bike because her own had recently been damaged. Before leaving the house, she asked Patty to come and get her if she wasn't able to make it back by noon. In usual Tara fashion, she had plans to play tennis with her boyfriend at 12:30, and also had a bunch of other stuff that she wanted to get done. When 12 o'clock passed and Tara still hadn't returned home, Patty did as her daughter had asked, assuming that she might be having more bike trouble. However, after going up and down Tara's whole route a couple of times, she couldn't find her anywhere. That's when she started to get worried and decided to call police. A search was organized, one which quickly took an eerie turn when a couple of unsettling clues were found. A cassette tape that it was believed Tara had been listening to during her ride was found at the side of the highway, along with tracks at the shoulder of the road. The tracks looked like they had been made by a bicycle, and some believed that they could have been skid marks, suggesting some sort of a sudden accident or struggle. Over the next few weeks, the effort to find Tara grew substantially. Family, friends, and police were assisted by an army of community volunteers, and additional law enforcement resources such as dogs, planes, and heat-seeking detectors were brought in. Unfortunately, in all that time, only one other piece of potential evidence was found: a broken shard of plastic that was thought to have come from Tara's yellow Sony Walkman. According to several reports from the time, this piece was found miles away from where Tara disappeared. Patty told the media she believed her daughter had been abducted, and that the bit of the Walkman was Tara's way of attempting to leave behind a trail. Understandably, the abduction theory of the case quickly became the most widespread, especially after police began speaking with the handful of people that had seen Tara on the morning of September 20th during her bike ride. Though none of them had actually witnessed anything happening to her directly, several described a light-colored older model pickup truck with a camper shell attachment that looked like it had been following her. Most of the sightings were around 11:45 a.m. and took place when Tara would have been just a couple of miles from home. Sadly, despite these early leads, almost no progress would be made in the case past this point. That was until a few months later, when something happened that would forever change the investigation. On June 15th, 1989, so almost 9 months to the day after Tara vanished, a woman in the city of Port St. Joe, Florida, noticed something on the ground after walking out of a convenience store. It was a Polaroid photo, which had seemingly been discarded on the pavement of the parking lot. When the woman turned it over, she was extremely disturbed by what she saw. The photo was of a boy and a young woman lying on some pillows and blankets in the back of a windowless white van. Their mouths were both covered with black duct tape, and their arms were behind their backs, suggesting that they had been restrained. The young woman bore a striking similarity to Tara Calico. The woman who found the Polaroid didn't know this, but still, she thought the photo was creepy enough that she reported it to police immediately, especially because she was pretty sure the white van in the image was the same one that she had seen parked outside on her way into the convenience store. The van had since left, but when police were called, they attempted to set up a perimeter in the local area to try and track it down. Unfortunately, this was unsuccessful. The woman who had found the Polaroid had caught a glimpse of the male driver of the vehicle, but the only real details she could give police were that he had a mustache and appeared to be in his 30s. Given how unsettling the Polaroid was, it quickly garnered a lot of media attention. It only took about a month before someone connected it to the Tara Calico case. When Patty saw the Polaroid, she was immediately convinced that the young woman in the photo was her daughter. It wasn't just the physical resemblance either. Patty pointed to 2 specific things in the image that she said made her certain that this was Tara. The first thing was the paperback book that can be seen sitting next to the woman in the photo. The book is My Sweet Audrina by V.C. Andrews. According to Patty, Andrews was one of Tara's favorite authors. The second thing she pointed out was a faint mark that appears to be on the woman's right calf. Patty said that Tara had a scar in the same place on her right leg from when she had been involved in a car crash in high school. The mystery surrounding the Polaroid only deepened when another New Mexico family came forward and said that they recognized the boy in the photo. They believed it was their son, 9-year-old Michael Henley, who had gone missing in April of 1988 while on a hunting trip with his father in the Zuni Mountains. As you might imagine, when news broke that a second disappearance had been linked to the Polaroid, the story spread like wildfire. The case was featured on every crime show under the sun at the time, prompting endless speculation about whether the people in the photo really were Tara and Michael, and if so, what had happened to them. The Polaroid was eventually sent off for analysis to the FBI, the Los Alamos National Laboratory, and even Scotland Yard. All 3 came back with different conclusions. One believed that the woman in the photo was Tara Calico, another believed it wasn't, and the third said their analysis was inconclusive. Things got more complicated again in June of 1990, when human remains were discovered in the Zuni Mountains. The area was just a few miles from the campsite where Michael Henley had disappeared more than 2 years earlier. After some investigation, it was found that these were indeed Michael's remains. It was determined that the young boy had likely wandered off and simply died of exposure. With Michael definitively ruled out as being the boy in the photo, skepticism grew about the Polaroid in general. Not just about whether it was Tara in the image, but whether it was related to any kind of crime at all. Among the things pointed out were the fact that you can't actually see if the woman and boy's hands are bound. Many wondered if the Polaroid was just some kind of dark prank or joke, one that the 2 subjects were willing participants in. Others, however, remained convinced that even if the 2 people in the image weren't Tara and Michael, they were still the victims of some kind of kidnapping. In retrospect, it seems the Polaroid was both a blessing and a curse. though it did a lot to spread awareness of Tara's disappearance and keep the story alive. Ultimately, it didn't really move the case forward. I think it could also be argued that it took attention and resources away from other aspects of the investigation, even long after police themselves expressed doubts about whether it had anything to do with the case. As years began to pass, news and announcements regarding the investigation became fewer and farther between. In 1998, Tara was officially declared dead, and her death was ruled a homicide. However, no suspects were arrested or publicly identified, nor was any concrete theory of the case released. One of the most heartbreaking aspects of the story definitely has to be the articles and reports detailing Tara's family and their decades-long search for answers. The ones discussing Patty are especially gut-wrenching. Even after Tara was declared legally dead, Patty apparently never gave up hope that her daughter would one day return home. Even when she and Tara's stepfather John finally moved in 2003, they brought along all of her possessions and kept a bedroom for her in their new home. Patty passed away in 2006 following complications from a series of strokes. According to those close to her, even near the end of her life, whenever she would see a girl on a bicycle, she would point and ask if it was Tara. At the time of our last video on this story, more than 4 years ago, this is basically all we knew. Many theories have emerged over the years about what might have happened to Tara, from her being the victim of a serial killer to her running away to start a new life. Obviously, some of these were more plausible than others, but much like that Polaroid photo, most offered more questions than answers. Fortunately, it appears that may finally be starting to change. Well, sort of. In June of 2023, the Valencia County Sheriff's Office made a surprise announcement. After calling a press conference, they stated that after nearly 35 years, their investigation into the disappearance of Tara Calico had finally been completed. Specifically, Sheriff Denise Vigil told reporters, quote, "At this time, law enforcement believes there is sufficient evidence to submit this investigation to the District Attorney's Office for review of potential charges. Currently, the identities and specifics of the persons of interest are sealed by the court and will remain so until a court orders otherwise." If you're confused by this statement, essentially it means that police believe that they finally know what happened to Tara, as well as who is responsible, but they are stopping short of sharing that information with the public until they get the green light from the District Attorney's Office that they think the case is strong enough to move forward for prosecution. I know what many of you are probably thinking. June of 2023 was more than a year ago. What's the deal? Well, it's hard to say exactly. Police never committed to a timeline when they made that announcement, though they did suggest that going through the more than 3 decades worth of files in the case could be a lengthy process. They also said that the DA would likely only sign off on charges once all other possible suspects had been eliminated. Speaking of the files, it seems that at least part of the reason this might be taking so long is the sheer amount of inconsistencies and bad information that has made its way into the investigation over the years. Even while doing basic research to make this video, it became clear that the Polaroid photo is far from the only piece of controversial evidence in the case. For example, pretty much every news source we came across while researching mentioned the cassette tape and the piece of the Walkman, as well as the fact that they were found to belong to Tara. But then we found statements from authorities that would just flatly contradict that. A good example of this is an article from May of 2023, shortly before the update announcement was made. It features an interview with one of the lead investigators on the case, Lieutenant Joseph Rowland. Here's an excerpt from that article. Quote, "Rowland said misinformation about the case has spread online, including a rumor that Calico's Walkman, containing her Boston cassette tape, was found, potentially giving law enforcement information on where she was last seen. Calico's parents circulated information about that supposed evidence, which Rowland said was inaccurate." Rowland went on to say directly in the interview, quote, "There was a cassette tape found on the side of the road. It had been exposed to the sun for so long that it distorted its color and degraded the cassette tape, so not consistent with a cassette tape that somebody was listening to less than 24 hours before." And this is only the stuff we know about. There's 35 plus years of facts and details to go through and make sure everything is consistent, which quite frankly sounds like a daunting task. So I understand why investigators would need to have all that stuff worked out before wanting to share anything further with the public. Still, they had to know that giving an update like this would set some sort of expectation, not just for the public, but for Tara's many surviving family members and friends. Fortunately, we're not entirely in the dark here. Thanks to previous statements made by law enforcement, as well as ongoing investigative work led by Tara's loved ones, we have some information about what direction the case is likely pointing. This theory of the case actually goes back more than a decade, when the sheriff of Valencia County at the time, Rene Rivera, made statements that he was confident he knew what had happened to Tara. He said that a couple of local teenagers were responsible, and that they had been following her in their truck while she was riding her bike that day in 1988. At some point, they accidentally hit her, then abducted and later killed her to hide what had happened. He said he believed that 2 other people had also helped to dispose of her remains. Now, Rivera never offered any real proof of these claims, and was actually criticized by Tara's family at the time. However, since then, others have come out to allege that some version of this story is in fact true. Among this group is Tara's high school friend, Melinda Escobel, who has devoted many years of her life to investigating the case and keeping publicity around it alive. Much of this has been done through her podcast, Vanished, where she has released information as well as her own theories and conclusions about what happened. While Escobel has stated in interviews that she also can't name names or leak specifics for the same legal reasons as police, what she has said is that she believes the culprits behind Tara's abduction and murder are still alive and from the local area. However, she has gone further than Rivera in suggesting that the crime was no accident. Rather, that Tara had been an ongoing victim of stalking at the time of her disappearance, and the people responsible also carried out her murder. In another interview we came across, Escobel stated, quote, "She was being stalked. She had turned someone down for a date, and they were not happy about it. They started messing with her, asking her to go to a party, getting real close to her. You know, the boys were drunk and high, and they hit her and knocked her off her bike. We believe she took off running to the east." The article continues, quote, "After that, Escobel said she thinks the boys sexually assaulted Calico, then killed her to prevent her from speaking out." Of course, you might be wondering, if the perpetrators are local and all of this happened within the community, why has the case remained unsolved for so long? Well, many people believe there's a good reason for that. In short, a cover-up within the Valencia County Sheriff's Office. This is also an old theory, but nonetheless one that has persisted. It goes that the son of the sheriff at the time of Tara's disappearance, Lawrence Romero Jr., was involved in the crime, and that the sheriff and the parents of the other culprits worked to conceal what had happened. For their part, police say that this was looked into and that Romero Jr. was ruled out as a suspect. However, many remain convinced of the cover-up, including Escobel. It's unclear if she believes that Romero Jr. specifically was involved, but in interviews we found she did say there was some sort of effort to conceal what had truly happened, and even suggested her life had been threatened for speaking out. Essentially, this is where the case remains today. Since that update last year, police haven't released any new details, though they seem confident that it's only a matter of time before the truth will be revealed. At this point, it really does seem like the iconic Polaroid was just a massive red herring, though I suppose only time will tell. In any case, I hope that this mystery can soon be put to bed once and for all, because Tara Calico's loved ones have already waited far too long for both justice and for answers. The second and final story we wanted to give you all an update on today is one that we also covered quite a while ago now, and is from a video we did on mysterious disappearances on cruise ships. This case just had a major development a couple of months ago, though I haven't seen a lot of people talking about it. It's the story of a 38-year-old woman named Xing Lei Li. A heads up before we start, reports are super inconsistent about the spelling and pronunciation of Xing's name. I would say that the majority of sources refer to her as Xing, but a good chunk spell it slightly different as Xiang. She also apparently sometimes went by the name Angie. Just something to be aware of. Anyway, on February 9th, 2017, Xing Lei Li, her 44-year-old husband Daniel Belling, and their 2 young boys, ages 4 and 6, boarded a ship in Italy called the MSC Magnifica. The family, who lived in Dublin, Ireland, were there to take a 10-day cruise across the Mediterranean, one that was scheduled to make stops at various ports in places like Greece, Cyprus, Spain, and Malta. As their accommodations for the voyage, the family had booked one of the ship's more sizable staterooms. The room came with a balcony that provided them a direct view overlooking the ocean. It appeared they were in for a fun-filled vacation packed with the perfect blend of sightseeing and relaxation. And at first, that's exactly what it seemed like had happened. However, when the ship pulled back into port on February 20th and people began disembarking for the final time, the crew of the MSC Magnifica realized that they had a serious problem. A person was missing from their head count. That person was Xing Lei Li. And actually, it turned out that no one could remember seeing her for several days. This was all the more strange because her husband Daniel hadn't said anything about this. In fact, by the time this was even noticed, Daniel and the kids had left the boat and had already gone to the airport to catch a flight back to Ireland. It was here that Daniel would be taken into custody while an investigation was launched. That investigation would ultimately uncover a number of unsettling things. As I mentioned before, no one on board the ship could remember seeing Xing for quite some time before she was discovered to be missing. The last confirmed sighting of her ended up being just the second full day of the trip, on February 11th. On top of this, those who had seen Xing said that she appeared to be arguing with Daniel quite a bit. The owner of a souvenir shop on board the ship said that she had witnessed Daniel yelling at Xing over a pair of shoes, telling her to, quote, "Put these on instead of your sandals and shut up." This was accompanied by other troubling statements from staff on the ship, whose accounts about Daniel's behavior seemed to confirm that he knew his wife was gone. Employees in the dining area said that they had seen Daniel and the boys eating without Xing from February 11th onwards, and a member of the cleaning staff said that Daniel had informed her on the 4th day of the trip that she no longer needed to make up the sofa bed in his room. She claimed he told her that only 3 people were sleeping there, not 4. When Daniel was asked about all of this, he told police that, yes, he had known that his wife was gone part of the way into the trip, but he claimed that he didn't think she was missing. He explained that she had left the cruise when they stopped in Greece, telling him that she had some urgent business to take care of. He said that afterwards, he assumed she had just returned home on her own to Dublin. Now, as ridiculous as this sounds, according to reports, this is actually something Xing had done before. She had previously left a family holiday part of the way through, and had even once taken off to her native China for several months without really telling Daniel what was going on. However, there was a problem with Daniel's explanation. You see, as part of their system to keep track of guests, the MSC Magnifica employed a keycard system used on a lot of cruise ships. Basically, whenever a passenger embarks or disembarks from the ship, they are supposed to swipe their card in order to keep track of the people coming and going. And in Xing's case, there was no record of her ever leaving the ship after initially boarding on February 9th. To make sure it wasn't an error with the keycard system, crew members also checked CCTV cameras to see if they could spot Xing disembarking. Once again, they came up empty. As it happened, this wasn't the only hole in Daniel's story. His claim that Xing had simply left the vacation of her own accord became harder to believe when authorities found out that almost all of Xing's personal belongings had been left behind. This included her clothes, her cell phone, her wallet, and several ID documents. In fact, the only thing that appeared to be gone was a single piece of luggage, which was nowhere to be found. Needless to say, police were becoming incredibly suspicious of Daniel Belling. This feeling only increased when he started changing his story. At first, Daniel had said that thing about Xing leaving on business, but then he stated that she had actually told him she was tired of the vacation and wanted to go home. Later on, he would change this again to a modified version of that first claim, saying that he believed something had been done to her by the people she was meeting up with in Greece. Investigators had their own theory, though. They believed that Daniel had killed his wife sometime on February 11th, placed her body in that missing piece of luggage, and thrown her remains overboard. This explained why Xing had never been logged or recorded disembarking from the ship. Authorities were even more confident in this theory when they learned about Daniel and Xing's tumultuous relationship. At the time of the family vacation, the pair had been having problems in their marriage for years and were preparing to separate. On top of this, they were experiencing financial difficulties. Obviously, at this point, things weren't looking good for Daniel Belling. However, this is when the case got truly bizarre. You see, while Daniel was being held in custody in Italy, his nephew back in Ireland came forward claiming that he had made two important discoveries. First, he received an invoice showing that Xing's credit card had been used to pay a toll on the M50 motorway. This had happened on March 21st, 2017, more than a full month after she was reported missing. Next, the nephew said that when he had gotten the keys to Daniel and Xing's residence and went to check on it, he arrived there to discover that someone had changed the locks. Again, this had all apparently happened while Daniel was locked up. This is when he and his lawyers came out with a new explanation: that Xing was actually alive and that she was trying to frame Daniel for her murder. As further evidence of this, Daniel and his legal team pointed to statements Xing had made to an official with the Irish Child and Family Agency prior to her disappearance. Statements in which she apparently told the official that she was fed up with life in Dublin and wanted to go back to China. They also pointed to text communication she was allegedly having with a secret lover, suggesting this is who she might have run off with. In addition to all of this, there were other, more basic problems with the police investigation. Things like that the alleged crime scene had never been properly secured. When Xing was discovered to be missing, the room where she, Daniel, and the kids had been staying wasn't seized. By the time a forensics team got in there, 7 days had passed, and new guests had already been in there. This isn't even to get into the fact that police didn't have a body, so proving any kind of a case in court was already going to be more difficult. As a result, 14 months after he was initially arrested, Daniel Belling was released on bail while Italian authorities considered their next steps. He promptly returned to Ireland. At the time of our last video on this story in July of 2020, Italian officials had just announced that they were moving forward with the case. They had charged Daniel with both murder and destruction of a body. That trial finally came to a close at the end of May of this year, so just a few months ago. When it did, Daniel was found guilty on both counts and sentenced to 26 years in prison. Just like everything else in this case, though, the ramifications of this decision are far from straightforward. You see, Daniel refused to go back to Italy for the proceedings and was tried and convicted in absentia. On top of this, Italian officials have not yet filed any kind of extradition request. It's possible that this is because Daniel and his lawyers have filed an appeal and they're waiting to see how that plays out. But yeah, at the time of this recording, he remains a free man in Ireland. In terms of whether Daniel Belling is actually guilty or not, personally, I have absolutely no idea. His actions certainly look incredibly suspicious, but if you've been watching this channel for any amount of time, then you've probably seen us cover stories where people look super guilty and turn out to be innocent. What I will say is that if Daniel is innocent, he's done himself no favors. Since the very beginning, he just hasn't seemed like he really cares about any of this, and has made numerous negative comments about his wife to the media over the years. He's also blamed her for basically everything, even for stuff that has nothing to do with this case. Like, for example, while the murder case was working its way through the Italian courts, Daniel was slapped with different charges back in Dublin. These were related to at least 6 occasions when he had falsified documents in order to fraudulently obtain a mortgage from the Bank of Ireland. He was sentenced to 3.5 years in prison for this in 2022, though the sentence was fully suspended by a judge. During the proceedings, Daniel claimed that the whole thing was Xing's idea, and he said that he regretted going along with the plan. Anyway, right now, that's where we're at with this case. Daniel's appeal is still pending, and to this day, no trace of Xing Lei Li has ever been found. We'll be sure to update you though. if anything changes in the future.
Before we wrap up, we'd like to take a second to give a huge shout out to everyone who has made it this far into the video. Seriously, thank you so much for watching. If you found today's upload interesting and informative, we'd be honored if you'd consider liking and subscribing, as well as hitting the notification bell and selecting all notifications to stay up to date with our latest releases. If you're looking for additional ways to help support the channel, we'd love to have you join us over on Patreon. Patrons get ad-free and early access to all of our content, as well as 4 additional stories per week for each of our Crimes of the Week and Crimes of the Week International videos. You can learn more at patreon.com/crimezone, where you'll also find some of the fine folks whose names are currently on screen. All that being said, we understand that not everyone has the means to support financially, and that's totally okay. We appreciate every like, sub, share, and comment that you send our way. Once again, thanks so much everyone, and take care.